Hello and welcome to the Alpha Artist Q&A. Today we have Steve Miller with us. Steve, it's a pleasure having you here. Welcome.
Thank you, thank you. Estou muito contente hoje.
Oh my God, speaking Portuguese. What a treat. Steve, can you tell us where you are right now and how is this year going for you so far?
So I'm currently in Sagaponack, New York. Before COVID, my base was New York City, and then it made sense during the height of COVID to be out in nature. And then I realized how much I love being in nature. So I've been here the whole time for a year.
Yeah, no, wonderful. It's a beautiful region, although I don't know it too well. I've passed through.
All right, well, you're going to come visit me, I hope.
Absolutely. I would love that. Just let me know when and where. And Steve, can you tell us a little bit in your own words who you are as an artist?
So as an artist, I've always been interested in new visual language systems. And I always thought that the visual language of any culture is the visual language of its time. And if you work in that visual language, your art will immediately have a kind of automatic relevancy and a contextualization.
Mhm.
So for me, that visual language is technology. And I understood by doing a lot of reading and reading critical theory, it made me think about the visual language of our time. And I started working with computers in the 1980s because I realized that I wanted that kind of language system encoded in my visual work. And I started working with computers, technology. I got into medical technology because I started at the time of the AIDS virus, and I saw something in these images of electron microscopes of something of beauty and something of horror. And I think that is this sort of crazy dialogue that represents our time, something that's moving, out of control very quickly. And that goes from the environment to COVID. And what got me to Brazil is that I was taken on a trip to be in a show in Rio, actually, at the Gallery Mercedes Viegas in Gavia. And Nessia Leonzini took us down there as a group, the artists that were in the show. And I had this unbelievable confrontation with nature. And it made me think about how could I spend more time in Brazil? It was really that simple. But I'm kind of a workaholic. And if I can't be doing a project, I can't just hang out. So I'm sitting this is a true story. I'm on Ilha Grande and I'm looking up and there's this jaca fruit, right? Like, you know how big they are. It's like,
Yes, it's huge.
really, yeah, big. And I'm going
When
like,
you're not afraid to fall into your head, you
yeah,
would
and go, this thing's gonna
know the
kill me.
story.
My
Yeah.
my trip to Brazil is dangerous. So I had this idea and I was thinking I was in the jungle. They have a great Atlantic rainforest there that's pretty much, pristine parts of the island. And
Yes.
I'm going like, So Brazil, they say the Amazon and these rainforests are the lungs of the planet. And I had been working with X-rays and medical technology, looking at portraiture and still life, taking objects to the hospital. I said, and this jaca looked like a pair of human lungs. So I thought, what if I took this jaca and took an X-ray of it to see what's inside? And I was thinking, okay, if the Amazon are the lungs of the planet, I could take X-rays of the flora and fauna and do kind of a metaphorical checkup of the world's health. So I called the planet the project in Portuguese. It's Saúde do Planeta,
Health.
and in
Yeah.
English, and I have the trademark in Brazil and in U.S. Health of the Planet. So that kind of trip from technology to nature got me to where we are right now.
This is wonderful. And you have behind you like a little piece of skateboard that I can imagine uh, came like from this series. So maybe like just help us like have like a better idea. Like unfortunately, I haven't been able to share images during the conversation, but like we can see a little piece. So like, can you describe a little better of like what does health of the planet looks like? And what besides from the jaca, what are the type of things that you took the X-ray?
So we started with plants actually in Rio. We went to the big market, and I had found a hospital in Brazil, a children's cancer hospital actually, that was willing to give me time in their radiology department to x-ray plants. So I actually went down with this image of this python. I said, this is what I want to do. And we went to the market with a botanist, and I spent a week bringing plants to the hospital in actually Sao Paulo. And then I realized I needed animals to do flora and fauna, and I went to Belém. And in Belém, we had live alligators, piranha, um, sloth, live human sloth. I'm trying to think, iguana. Here's one of the fish,
Oh,
right? So that's a piranha from the Amazon River.
Amazon, yeah.
And so we put this combination together of plants and animals, and then eventually I started working with a environmental group in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, that was doing all the remote sensing. So they were doing the kind of satellite land clearing images. And okay, so here we go. I'm going to just see if this works. I'm going to unplug my computer and take you into my studio, because this is kind of an interesting piece.
Wow.
So what happened was, so this geometry that you see.
Wait, we can't hear you properly now.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
All right. So this geometry that you see is the satellite clearing. So those are
Dave, I think,
large areas of the Amazon
yes.
that show land clearing, as well as something we're doing right here, right? So these are the satellite maps.
Mhm.
And you know, what I was doing was I was going into the favela in Rocinha. So you can see some of the, I've never done this before, so I would take my computer around. So we don't know if this is working, but so here we have.
This is the first for us as well. It's a live tour.
Okay, so you can see that's a straight shot of the wires in Rocinha with the, in this case,
Mhm.
right, I'm putting the skate deck
That's
with the wires. And the idea was that in the favela of Rio was this, so that painting with all the bright colors on it, those are the need. That's the land that's been cleared. And that's been cleared for various reasons, but one of it is there's uncontrolled growth and there's uncontrolled need for electricity. So the favela for me did something very important, because those wires that are, you know, all over the place when you go into a favela in Rio, for example, or any favela anywhere in the world, it could be India, but you see these crazy line drawings in space.
Mhm.
And those are drawings based on human necessity.
Of course.
So we're all part of this conversation. And the prints that you guys have are this representation of everyone's a part of the dialogue. So, you know, fashion industry uses resources. The favela is a base need in the resources. And I'm looking at high technology and the collider at CERN, and understanding that we're all in this conversation. And part of this conversation is the respect of beauty and understanding the natural environment, how fragile it is, and knowing that we live in a relationship to this.
No, that's so interesting, so many different levels. And I would love to hear more about like what do you think like your perspective as a gringo, like a non-Brazilian person, like, and like do you think that like influenced the way that you saw everything that you experienced in Brazil versus someone who has grown up with like slums like all around, like, and having like not that like the Amazon is like so accessible. Unfortunately, a lot of Brazilians have never been to the Amazon, and myself, I've made my way there for the first time recently. So I think like what do you think would be the impact that like your background as a non-Brazilian had, like in your understanding of the Brazilian culture and nature, and ultimately like your creations?
So Brazil, for me, as a visitor, is this place of overwhelming radical contrasts. So, you know, you go to Sao Paulo and you sit in traffic, right? I mean, there's 20 million people or plus in Sao Paulo. It's just like the market there is the biggest market I've ever seen. When we went into the warehouse to actually get the jaca that we took
Ex-
to the hospital, the warehouse just for watermelon and jaca was the size of an American football field.
Yeah.
One warehouse with only watermelon and jaca of vast dimensions. And you go through this warehouse and you go like, I've never seen anything like this.
Mhm.
When you go to the Amazon, this is a true story. We went into actually one part of the Atlantic rainforest with a landowner. It was his land. We were on his property. We went kind of late in the day and we got lost. And it was like, oh my God, it's getting dark. We don't know where we are. And all you see around you is is plants, and you have
Yeah.
no idea the way out of there. So it's this experience of vastness. Then you go to Rocinha, right? And that favela in Rio. I'm not sure, but it's anywhere from 100 to 300,000 people. And you see these wires that are just like crazy, like spaghetti. And you just go like uncontrolled, kind of growth, but very human about what humans need, which is basic services. Then you meet the people of Brazil, and like music is so important, and creativity, and the art in Brazil is very, very performance oriented, more so I'd say than other cultures. And the last word of an essay that was one of my first books about radiology called Radiographic. I use the surfboard, and this image right behind me is the representation of movement and dance. And the last word was, in Brazil, it's a samba with science.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And just like if we go back to the work of Elliot Sica, Tropicalia, like, and the interaction, this is something which is very Brazilian. So I love you talking about this. But let's go back in time, and I would love to hear from you. How did you get to this? Like, what is your background, and like, when was it that like you understood that like you're an artist and that you had to create? How's that process for you?
Well, that's I guess every artist is probably the same on one level, in that we all draw as children, right? We all make these paintings. They give us a piece of paper. We just start doing it. In my case, I had a lot of learning disabilities, and I didn't speak till I was maybe, beyond 4 or 5. And what I did speak was nonsense. So my world was the visual world. And that was the world where I could really connect and communicate. And that never left me. So I was always the guy that was making the poster for the dance in high school. And, I was called on to do whatever the visual trick was that you needed. And when I got to university, I actually thought I was going to be an architect. And I went to one physics class. I've since really gotten involved with physics, as you know. And I went to one math class, and I was like, I'm in the wrong place. I changed all my
I know the
courses.
feeling.
Yeah, I changed all my courses. I say, I hate math, which I don't, and I hate physics, which actually I don't. But the idea of sitting through those courses, and I just canceled all my courses, and I took art courses and a music course. I took courses of things that I really loved, and I started apprenticing an artist that was one of the teachers and helping him make sculptures. And I realized that this is really what I love doing.
No, that's so beautiful. Thank you. Like, I often get emotional with what our artists share. Like, and again, like, I think it's so nice to hear a story like this, because like so many people probably share similar experiences. And I think like finding a tool that like really gives you the voice that you need, it's a gift. I think like thinking like about like the like present moment we're living right now, like, and so many of the hardships that like a lot of us have been facing with COVID, like the economical crisis. You already touched upon like a little bit like on the value of art for like yourself, like, but like I would love to hear your thoughts about like what do you think could be like the role of art like in changing this reality we're going through, like, and making this possibly like a better world for us in the future.
I love the question, Renata. I don't have any illusions about what I think art can do. I know that, like you, I'm a very optimistic person. We're in incredibly difficult times. We've seen the suffering in Brazil. We've seen the decimation of the planet. We have horrible leadership. We just got rid of one of the worst presidents, the worst president in American history, a liar and a cheat named Donald Trump. And we have these same kinds of political figures in other countries. And I'll only talk about my own country in relationship to that. You can chime in on your thoughts about Brazil, but it's a incredibly difficult and challenging time, which we're all aware of. We've seen, racism, brutality, uncontrolled, disease, irresponsible political leadership. So, what can art do? I don't think it can do a lot, quite frankly. However, in spite of that, when I was in Brazil, what I realized was the important connection to people. Like there's a real kind of human connection with pleasure and dance and I found that an enthusiasm for the beach, for life, for food, fashion, and art. I think art in Brazil is maybe deeper into the soul of the culture than most places that I've been to. And when I was in Brazil, I was thinking like, this gallery thing is just not enough. The idea that you would put your art in, a gallery and it would sit there. My gallery in this case was Gallery Tempo, which was right next to the Olado de Copacabana, and Copacabana.
It's real.
Yeah, and I realized that I really, as much as it was an amazing experience, I realized that there was this other culture that I needed to embrace, and that's when I went to the Amazon and I met Oscar Massavet at a Brazil benefit that I had given some donation to. I had no idea who he was. We started talking, and what do you do? What do I do? I was just in Belém. Oh, I was just in Belém. And I'm going like, what were you doing there? And he said, well, I was looking for fabrics and materials. And so I asked him if he was an artist. And he said, well, yes. And also I run this company. So I said, well, I got a great idea for you. And we eventually did a surf line for Osklin of bathing suit, which had the piranha on it and some t-shirts, and I realized how great it was to get the work out into the world. And then when I was in the Amazon, we found this alligator, and a live alligator, which we X-rayed. And the idea of the environment from a 19th century Patron kind of version, you would kill the alligator, stuff it, and put it on your wall. And I was thinking, well, what if we made another kind of trophy and we took the X-ray of the alligator, we put it on a surfboard? And water is such an important discussion in Brazil, right? The Amazon rainforest, the watershed is being eliminated because you clear the land and there's no way to have the water absorbed. You're in Sao Paulo. You've been in Sao Paulo during one of those rains where the water is like 2 or 3 feet, literally on the street. And part of that problem is that the runoff is so huge. And then there's this love of water, the love of surf. You've got over 3,000 miles of coastline. So I started thinking about how to get the art into the world, to get the message out into the world, and see if it's even possible to engage in a more public conversation that would embrace the beauty of the environment with these, like the X-ray of the piranha and the python. These are just like incredible images, and could those stimulate this conversation out into the world? So I started making scarves, masks, fashion. I have a very modest, sustainable fashion line called Health of the Planet art. And so, the idea was, can art change anything? I'm not sure, but can we move these images out into the world and be part of a larger dialogue? That's my hope.
No, I couldn't agree more with so many of the points that you brought in. And I think like one of the things that I'd like to develop a little further was you mentioned a lot of times like the inclusion of like the general public in this conversation. And I think like for those who have experience with a more traditional art market, we know that that tend not to like that's usually not the case. Like it tends to be something which is very exclusive, and then like people who don't have an art background sometimes feel quite intimidated to go inside of galleries and to join this conversation. So I think like if you could develop a little bit more like on this idea, like and the importance of doing projects such as the one that like you mentioned with fashion, like the collaboration with Osklen, and also the collaboration we are creating together now with Alpha, where we're launching a limited edition series of prints, which are going to be a little more affordable than your traditional artwork.
So, when I met you guys online, I wanted to work with you immediately because one, I love Brazil. So anything that might give me an opportunity to go back or be in touch with the culture really interested me. But the other thing that interested me was what we, continuation of what we just talked about is getting imagery out there so everyone can see it. So it's easily accessible. Like what I like about your project is you're just going to bump into these images by accident, right? You're in a kind of space, you have no expectations. Is it possible to bring a kind of imagery to the space, surprise your eyes, and then to create a dialogue? And some of the images that you selected are this combination of the conversation that we just talked about: environment, the beauty of nature, in combination with how we use those resources. So, of course, I'm trying to make them accessible and make them stunning so that you will look at them. And then there's this other level that we hope that will, like, wow, that's really interesting. What's that about? And you'll start to enter into that conversation. But I think the surprise action of seeing it somewhere that you don't predict is the opportunity to continue this discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And the importance of beauty in the process, right? I think like at the end of the day, we want to give an optimistic message, and like in beauty is something that like most people are attracted to. So I think that's a great way to capture people's attentions. So this is Earth Day week. It's coming soon. It's tomorrow. And I think like usually I like to wrap up the conversation with our artists talking about inspirations, like and messages that like can help the person who is like listening to this conversation to like be inspired and maybe like create some change in the world. So I'd like to hear like from you, like what are some of your thoughts about maybe things that we can do to keep protecting our environment, or like how do you see this like new world maybe like post pandemic developing, like and hopefully with a little bit more focus and care for our earth.
Well, for me, I believe is, and maybe as you do too, the environment is the most number one conversation. If we don't take care of our bodies, and if we're not healthy and eat the right food and work out and exercise and do the things that we know we need to do, we're going to deteriorate quicker. We're not going to have as good a life. And, the same goes true for the environment. We have to take care of the planet so that we have enough resources that everyone can live and have these resources that they need to continue their life. And that means, yeah, we have to have electricity. But, we're starting now, hopefully, a new phase in the US where we have a new president and there's this massive infrastructure plan that's put in place. And one of the key aspects of that infrastructure plan is alternative energy. I mean, it just makes so much sense
Mm.
to
That-
use alternative energy. Um, you know, in my fashion, it makes a lot more sense to use organic cotton. Osklin is completely, almost 100% sustainable fashion, which, you know, I was inspired by the leadership that I saw in Brazil on that aspect. So I think there's ways. I make these masks that are online, these COVID masks. They're 3-ply sustainable bamboo, right? So, you know, this idea that you can have practices that don't, it is slightly more expensive. I think that's an interest. You know, if you use organic cotton, you're going to pay a little bit more for it. But those that can pay for the better quality material, it's their responsibility to do so. If you're, and you're recycling clothing, there's just so many ideas that are going around right now that can mitigate. And what if we could do, you know, produce enough um, electricity to start you know, absorbing the CO2. You can actually pull the CO2 out of the atmosphere, but it takes a lot of energy to do it. You're not going to use oil and gas to pull CO2 out of the atmosphere. It makes no sense. But if we could start to develop more local, I mean, energy, what we're seeing with the internet, what we're seeing with cryptocurrency is this idea of decentralization. So decentralization on the environmental front means that we all have solar panels on our houses. We all have windmills. You know, if we could do it, some form of where we can start to participate in a more localized version rather than this, you know, centralized version where the government makes all the decisions. And so I think that this idea of local awareness of materials is a really good trend, and hopefully the ones that have the resources can take the responsibilities and be the leaders. And even as consumers, we have choices, and if we have, you know, the wherewithal to make the better choice, it's our obligation to do so.
Yeah, this is a subject that interests me so much, and I think like you mentioned a variety of different things that like make a lot of sense to me. Energy, the way we consume, but like definitely the power and the role that the consumer has in demanding different options, in demanding like a different position from the companies, like, and also the governments who can actually create the real change. We don't have a lot of time to waste. We have like no time.
It's I have a very good friend, a guy named Carl Safina, who's written many books. He wrote a 3-page essay in my first book called Radiographic, and I had to, like, you know, beg him and nurture that relationship to get him to write. And he's an amazing writer. And the thing that he and another really good writer, Elizabeth Colbert, who writes for the New Yorker, they really make it clear that we are all interconnected, you know, and there's nothing more interconnected on a human level of dancing with somebody else and, you know, responding to somebody else's movement in a samba, for example, in Brazil, or moving with a wave on a surfboard. You know, there's this interconnected relationship, and this relationship in the environment, every time we get rid of a species due to extinction, we change everything and we put it out of balance. So, you know, it's extremely important to understand all of our relationships, not only on a human level between each other, which of course is respect, compassion, understanding, listening to someone, hearing what they're saying, and not necessarily lecturing. So if I'm doing that now, please forgive me. But the idea is that all of these resources, all of these plants, you kill an animal that eats a bug, then you have more bugs that are out of balance. You know, the bats are being extinct and they eat incredible amounts of mosquitoes. So this environmental conversation is absolutely the #1 conversation. It's a conversation about being connected on every level, organically, environmentally, and from human to human.
Amazing. This has been wonderful. And for if you don't know, like we call this video series Alpha Connect because we do believe that like the having the ecosystem connected and having like connections like the one that like we are having today, like it's like the basis for everything and a better world. So thank you so much for participating on our Alpha Connect series. And
Muito obrigado. Estou feliz por causa de você.
Estou feliz por causa de você também. Well, Steve, unfortunately, it's a short conversation, like I mentioned, but it has been such a pleasure learning more about you, your career, your experience. Like it's inspiring for sure. And thank you. It's a special week. It's the Earth Day week. It's an environmental conscious week. So we feel lucky to have you on board.
Thanks so much for asking me to participate with you, Renata. It's a real pleasure for me.